In case you weren't in the first session, my name's Ewan Kelly, and I hope you've had some caffeine. No! Oh, gee, I've no hope then. Caring for the dying and terminally ill. If you weren't in the last session in here, this is just an offering as a tool to help you reflect. Reflect on what is being said, but also what is being felt and what you're experiencing in response to what's going on in the room. So it's a tool for now, but perhaps also a tool for pastoral care. I'm not a Greek scholar, but apparently in John 20, the Greek for seeing, there's 3 different types of seeing in the resurrection story. So there is purely noticing. Noticing, without interpreting, just noticing. So I notice I'm feeling better after that coffee. I was needing that coffee. And I wonder what that was about. And I realised actually doing 3 sessions in a morning, I wouldn't do that again. That is a realisation, to be fair to myself, but also to you. But that's fine, it's fine for today. So noticing, purely noticing, and not judging or interpreting. Then being curious. So the folks were curious, or the disciples were curious about the robes in the tomb. And it was only later that the penny dropped, the connection was made, the aha moment. And how true that is, certainly for me, that at the time of practice, of being in pastoral care or in any other situation, the learning, the deep learning or the realization often happens when I'm walking or in the bath or when I wake up in the middle of the night or I'm watching the telly. Does that ring bells? Next slide, please. So, in the next hour, what do you notice emerging within you in response to what's happening? Just noticing. So it's a way of being gentle with yourself. It's not judging that feeling bad or feeling guilty about having certain feelings. Just noticing. And being curious where they come from, what they're about, and wondering, and maybe taking that with you. Noticing it and taking it elsewhere. And perhaps there comes a realization. And this is what we call deep learning. The deep learning won't come from me. You'll barely remember anything I say. But the deep learning comes from you. It's drawn out from you. Those moments of realization that make a difference to you and who you are and perhaps to your practice. Next slide, please. So, this is a session on care of the terminally ill and the dying. And I don't know how many people are in the room. We're sitting in rows and I'm standing up front. I wonder what your expectations are of a session entitled Care of the Terminally Ill. I wonder what your expectations are of this session. What are your expectations of me? Not so much as somebody who's going to talk, but perhaps hopefully facilitate. And what are your expectations of each other? Because there may be an opportunity to share something with a neighbour, or perhaps even with the whole group. So what are your expectations of each other? And what's your expectation of yourself? So have a wee think and maybe jot some things down. This is actually really important, not just for this session, but actually as you ring the doorbell or as you sit at the bedside. So what might be your expectations of this session? Just no right or wrong answers, but would anyone like to offer anything? Yep. No, sorry.
No expectation, just a willingness to absorb and to take in.
Okay, thank you. A willingness to absorb and take in. Yep.
Insight.
Insight. So you expect insight. You'll be looking for insight. Thank you. Yep.
To be stretched.
To be stretched. Thank you. Can I just come back? So where's that insight going to come from? Question mark.
Well, perhaps guidance might be a better word.
Okay. But it's really interesting. I guess I'm asking everybody, where might that insight or guidance come from? From inside, absolutely. So again, the best learning is actually being enabled to draw out that which is already there. The wisdom. So drawing on the wisdom, not just of individuals, but collectively. There's a massive amount of wisdom in the room. And how can we tap into that? Yep, there was a hand.
Learn some of the pitfalls specific to this area.
Okay, learn some of the pitfalls specific to this area. Anything else?
What do you see when the person is terminally ill?
Right, yeah, thank you. Beginnings. Beginnings, thank you.
A clearer way forward.
A clearer way forward. Yep.
Better equipped and learning from the experiences of others.
Yep, thank you. So better equipped and learning from the experience of others. Okay. What do you expect of me? Have you ever heard trying to keep one page ahead? Aye. Do you know that, you're talking about fears and risks, you know that one about being found out? Not just in a room like this, but actually when you sit next to somebody. Yep, so thank you. Well, I think. Yep.
Another educated opinion.
Another educated opinion. Thank you. Yes?
I would say the answers.
You're in the wrong room. But thank you. The answers. And how many people look to you for answers? Question mark. Not looking for an answer. But how many people, do they ever look to you for an answer? Are they really, when they ask you a question, looking for an answer? Question mark. So are you really looking for answers? Rhetorical question. Anything else that you expect of me?
Sharing your experience.
Hearing my experiences. Sharing of myself. Sure. Thank you. Yep.
So going by the first session, I expect you to be a good communicator.
What's that?
Going by the first session, I expect you to be a good communicator.
You expect me to be a good communicator. Okay. No pressure then. Oh, this is the third session now. Come on. Yep. Okay. What do you expect of each other in a session looking at care of the terminally ill? What do you expect of your neighbours, your fellow sojourners? Experience? Openness. Sharing? Non-judgmental. Thank you. No waggy fingers in this place. Can we decide that one? We are Presbyterian after all. But that's a crucial. That's a deal breaker. A deal breaker for pastoral care. And waggy fingers aren't just about what we say, or even about wagging the finger. It's about our demeanour. So thank you. Anything else that you expect of each other? To be listened to. And if I could add, to be respected. What I would also ask is that what is shared to your stays here in terms of Chatham House rules. So in terms of the content of a story stays here, but the feeling can go out the door. So your feeling or your response to what is shared can be shared over coffee, but not the content. Do you know what that wifey over there said? Again, a deal breaker for pastoral care. If we can't do it for each other, can we actually do it for those that we seek to work with? Anything else? Okay, what do you expect of yourself? Yep. Honesty. Thank you. Great. To be receptive. Thank you. Trust. Going to trust yourself. Well put. Trust yourself. Trust your gut. Trust your gut. Yep. You expect that of yourself. Thank you.
Get in touch with your own emotions and feelings, particularly because of what the subject is.
Yep. Say that again, sir.
Get in touch with your own emotions and feelings because of what the
Our subject is. So seek to get in touch with feelings and emotions. Not necessarily express them. There's no necessity whatsoever, but perhaps seek to be honest about how we're feeling to ourselves. Notice. And again, the noticing keeps it safe for ourselves because we're not judging it. We're not judging how we're feeling. We're just noticing it. And then perhaps being curious of what's happening. Thank you. I want to be responsible for myself. And my expectation is that, or I hope that you will be responsible for yourself. You will keep yourself safe. So you only share what you want to share. And actually, do you know what? If you would rather go and have a coffee or a walk, I know it's not easy to get up and leave a space, but I want to give you permission to do that. Because I don't know what's going on in your life right now, or what has gone on in your life. And we're just talking with somebody after the last session. Sometimes bits of our story come up and bite us right in the backside when we least expect it. So please have permission, if it feels okay, that you can go and have a coffee or a walk, or actually just sit. Does that feel okay? I think that's really, really important. Because I can't take care of everybody. If I was facilitating a small group, that would be easier. Okay. And my expectation of myself, again, is absolutely that I'll try and be real in the room, as real as I can. Thank you. Next slide. I think this is a lovely, I'm sure many of you have come across this before. It's a poem by the mystic Rumi. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honourably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Carl Jung would talk about such things as a gift. Even if they are difficult feelings, they're telling us something to notice and perhaps to wonder and to take away and find a trusted other to perhaps explore them with. Next, please. So this is my hypothesis, that offering pastoral care or accompanying somebody who is dying or who has a life-limiting illness is the same as caring for anybody. And yet, paradoxically, it's profoundly not. Why? I invite you to get into 2s or 3s to discuss why it's so different. Why is journeying or traveling with somebody who is dying or has a life-threatening or a life-limiting illness, why is that so different? And yet, why is it the same as caring for anybody else? maybe in twos or threes. And again, we're talking about confidentiality and sharing what you want to share. Is that okay? Okay, folks. Let's start with how is it the same? How is it the same as caring for anybody else or journeying with anybody else?
You're giving them comfort, no matter what stage in life.
Right, you're seeking to offer comfort wherever they are in life. Thank you.
Or just being there, drawing alongside.
Yeah, being there. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yep, thank you. Yep.
Parenting is a bit like when you've got 4 children. You love them all the same, but you love them all differently. So actually the care and the love is the same, but it's a person, it's an individual, it's them. So it's
Lovely. So it's the same but different for everybody that you're journeying with. That's a love. Thank you. Absolutely. So you're starting where people are at with their particular story. Thank you. Yep.
We were talking about how you can help people continue to live, which is the hospice thing, where you try to keep people alive in their dying state. My personal experience with both parents was that we were trying to help them die because they needed to die.
Yes. So.
And that was the hard thing.
Okay. So there is absolutely a kind of sentiment within hospice care of helping people live until they die. And I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Anne. Anne was saying, if it's okay to share, with her parents, she was actually helping them to die because they wanted to die. So what I'm noticing within myself, again, is the particularity of people's stories and their needs. We may not want them to die, but they very well might want to die. They might well have had enough. There are worse things in life than death. And death is the ultimate healing. And yet it may be so difficult because we may not want them to go. So already we're into the complexities very quickly. So thank you for that, and thank you for sharing that. Just notice where you are with that right now. Just notice where you're at with that. Is it a selfishness that we don't want them to die? What do folks think?
You don't want to lose. You don't want to lose their presence.
Yeah, you don't want to lose their presence. You love them. Perhaps they've always been there.
fear of change as well.
Fear of change, absolutely. Because when we lose somebody, we don't just lose them, we lose our relationship with them. We may lose our sense of family. There's all sorts of things that we lose, associated losses. Pardon? It's a whole, and that whole stays with us. We learn to live with the whole or not, but the whole stays.
They are us.
They are us.
More than just about our own mortality.
Thank you. Yeah, we are in touch with our own mortality.
And that's especially when it's someone your own age. When you're caring for someone who's terminally ill and they're older, older people die, you expect that. But when you're younger and it's someone your own age, that can be really, really hard, that care, that spiritual care.
Yeah, yeah. This could happen to me or could happen to somebody I love at this stage in life. Thank you. Do you know what? I wonder, come back at me here. These are very personal, but I wonder how universal. These are very personal, but I wonder how universal these thoughts and feelings are. And I wonder how often we actually verbalize them. Notice again where you are with that. Just notice what that feeling associated with that is. That these are highly significant things in our life and our living, and we're, maybe not all of us, but certainly most of us in the room are acknowledging that these are things that we don't talk about perhaps enough.
But people are beginning to talk about
They are.
Naomi advocates on television.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So it's opening a door for
But
church and
absolutely. But it's really, really interesting, you know, how many of our congregations now do Good Friday, you know, in the Church of Scotland? You know, there's a thing about, you know, we can't get to Easter Saturday, we can't get to Resurrection without Good Friday. And how often, you know, yeah. And so I mean, it really, I get angry. You turn on the radio or watch the telly and people are passing away, or we've lost them. No, sorry, they've died. They've died. And actually, you know, how often do we talk about death in church? All right, okay, there's more to life than death, but actually, having a beginning and an end gives life meaning. And we'll come on to that. But it's really, really interesting. And perhaps one of the things that we can be is an advocate for actually just using the word death or dying or beginning to talk about it. In your pack, you'll find there's a fantastic resource, a website, which I can't recommend highly enough, called Good Life, Good Death, Good Grief. And some of you might know of it. There's some fantastic resources there that are very accessible to use as an individual, as a family, or as a church, to gently explore some of these issues. Yeah.
I find I'm quite selfish about wanting not to talk about my personal experience of death.
Yep.
Because it's mine.
Sure. And that has to be respected. That has to be respected. And some of us are extroverts. Some of us can stand up and talk for Scotland. And some of us would die a death because we're more introverted and private. But there is something about, to what extent do we own this? Now, I don't know if I'll ever get my head around that I'm mortal. But actually, the question is, have I begun that journey? And if I've not begun to actually explore that, what right do I have to accompany somebody who's trying to do that for themselves? Does that make sense? Yes. Thank you. And my sense is that if you're still in the room, that you're doing that. It's the folks that aren't in the room, if that makes sense. Okay. We've beautifully, Nigel introduced us and others beautifully about why it's different, because it faces us with certain realities. What else is different about it? Yep.
One thing I wonder when somebody calls somebody from church in, what are they expecting of you?
Yes. Yep. What are their expectations? And how often do we explore that with them? You know, what is it that you want from me? How can I help? What's on your mind? And having those honest conversations. Anything else that's different?
People's worlds get smaller.
Brilliant. Absolutely, they get smaller. So, important people become more important as they get tired and less able to get out. And friends from work, or perhaps neighbours, or maybe passing acquaintances at church, become less important. So if I go knocking at the door, how am I going to be received? One, I represent the church and perhaps God. And two, their world has got smaller. So am I interfering into a quiet, private space? Or actually, do I bring the world in? Do I bring the world in? And certainly in the hospice, I found that is what people sometimes enjoyed. And they didn't actually want to talk about the life and death things. They wanted to talk about the football. Or wanted to hear about my boys and what they'd been up to. And it wasn't deep and meaningful, but actually you reminded them that they were still part of a wider world.
They're still human.
Brilliant. They're still human. They're still human. Absolutely.
They're still loved.
They're still loved. And they still have the capacity to love. We mentioned in the earlier session this morning that actually what I learned was that up until people died, they still had the need to give. They still had the need to be a parent, a partner, a mother, a father. They had the need to give as well as receive. And one of the hardest things was, for many people, was about being passive, that they felt people done to. Done to. Yeah. Thank you.
They may want to live until they die. They may not be wanting to focus on dying at that moment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My mother never talked about death. She had breast cancer, recurrent breast cancer, and then she had a massive pulmonary embolism. And I was frustrated because she didn't want to just sit down and have an honest conversation. She just didn't want to go there. And I found that really difficult. But for her, that was her journey. And I had to go elsewhere to talk about my needs. But you're absolutely right. And you know, people can, till the day they die, don't want to talk about it. It's their journey. And it's about respecting that journey. Jim?
It's thought of as a terminus or terminal, but it's not. It's a transition for you and them.
It is a transition, yeah, but there's still going to be a physical ending. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. I always struggle when people say, well, they'll be in a better place and they'll still be around. But for me, that's just hugely different. They are still around and they still can be a great voice and an encouragement and all sorts of things. But I can't give them a cuddle. It's different. It's different. But it is a journey. It is a transition. You're absolutely right. And all sorts of, yep.
Sometimes you say the person doesn't want to speak about it. Sometimes they want to speak about it when how they will.
Sure, and there's all sorts of issues there, absolutely. And there is something about finding opportunities if people want it to speak with you alone. On the other hand, the last thing they might want to do is speak with you alone. So again, it's about beginning where people are and offering them some invitations. How can I help you? Or this is something that we can offer. Absolutely. And actually, sometimes people find that they can't articulate how they feel. Some people can draw it. Some people can make it. Some people can point to or can talk about a metaphor. I remember one that was really helpful for me was a woman who was just completely overwhelmed with a diagnosis, and she had very little time to live. And where we got to was very helpful was that idea of Desmond Tutu's, that you can't eat an elephant in one big part, that you can only eat little bits of it. And that's where she started. So she started with telling her son the diagnosis and she was dying. And then she looked at little bits that she could do. So that was about control. And that's a massive, massive thing, not just for us who are accompanying people when things are out of control, but for people who are dying or terminally ill. How can we help them? How can we empower them to control the things that can be controlled if that's what they want? Okay, next slide. This is Nigel's point. So Winnie the Pooh and Piglet, who's accompanying who, I'm not sure. They're going into the dark wood to try and look for woozles. And it's about Piglet accompanying Winnie the Pooh at Winnie the Pooh's pace. He sets the tone of the content and the pace and the direction. But they're going into a dark place. And I think the hardest part is not so much going into that other person's dark place, but actually in journeying with them, we go into our dark place, that unknown, that mortality. And that's when things potentially can emerge and bite us in the bahuki. And my question is, where do we take that? Where do we take that stuff? A safe place with a trusted other. If we are going to journey with people into their dark places, and in doing so, we will inevitably come across our dark places, what do we do with it? Not just for our care, but actually for the care of the people that we're seeking to support. So for me, this stuff is a moral, it's an ethical thing, that actually we have places and spaces where we can go and explore these things. Next slide, please. Oh, do you know where this is? Somebody will have been there. This is the Mull of Galloway. This is the end of Scotland. This is the edge of life. And that's where people go, and that's where they take you, to the edge of life. You are looking, if you are journeying with somebody who is dying, you are looking over the edge, not just of their life, but of your life. You are looking into the unknown. And I think this is a beautiful metaphor, even though I say it myself, because there is a cafe there on the edge of the cliff, a safe place where you can be with another, and they can look over, and so can you. But it's acknowledging that that cliff is there. It's not hiding away. And my question is to me and to you is, how does that feel? And am I at a place in my own life to actually accompany others to the edge? Because there have been times in my life when it's not been appropriate. And again, that's an ethical issue. So how aware am I of where I am and where I might be going if I'm going to journey with somebody who is dying or has terminally ill? Next slide, please. Who knows Calvin and Hobbes? So Calvin is a 6-year-old boy whose best pal is a stuffed tiger who comes to life in his imagination. And they've found this baby raccoon who's been knocked over by a car. And they look after it, but the baby raccoon dies. So the stuffed tiger is the pastoral carer here. You know, Hobbes, I can't figure out this death stuff. Join the gang. Why did that little raccoon have to die? He didn't do anything wrong, and now he's having a really good rant. He was just little. What's the point of putting him here and taking him back so soon? And now they're under the bed. And the only thing that the tiger says in response to, it's either mean or it's arbitrary, and either way I've got the heebie-jeebies. And the tiger says very little, but says, why is it always night when we talk about these things? So notice the pastoral care that is offered by the stuffed tiger. And we're going to come back to this. But one of the things that going to the edge calls into questions, existential questions, philosophical and theological questions, questions of faith, questions of things that we just assumed were the right order of things. The fact that I'll die before my 3 boys. No, absolutely. Absolutely. So the questioning, our whole worldview, our faith, our beliefs can be thrown up in the air. So in making a space for others, How prepared are we, one, to say nothing? And you know, my training as a minister taught me to talk a lot, but it didn't taught me to keep my mouth shut. And two, not to have answers. And three, to allow people to explore and be tentative and provisional and be angry and ask questions about God and to God. And still not to have any answers. And in doing so, to give people permission to ask questions, to normalize that. So journeying with people may well call into questions not just of our faith, but actually our understanding of what life is about and the natural order of things. Next one, please. There's a poem by a Scots poet called Stuart Conn. It's called Visiting Hour. To the pond of our new garden were 5 orange stains under inches of ice. Weeks since anyone has been there, already by far the most severe winter for years. You broke the ice with a hammer. I watched the goldfish disappear, blunt-nosed and blunt-nosed and delicately clear. Since then, so much has taken place to distance us from where we were, that it should come to this. Unable to hide the horror in my eyes, I stand helpless by your bedside and can do no more than wish it were simply a matter of smashing the ice and giving you air. Hands up if you've ever felt like that. Next slide, please. Where's this? Ayers Rock, Uluru. Uluru. I was lucky enough about 6 years ago to go to Uluru. And like a lot of tourists, I wanted to go and climb Uluru. But then, when we got there, at the bottom of Uluru was a notice saying, for the indigenous people of this land, this is a sacred site. Please do not walk on our sacred place. Do not try to conquer, but walk round and connect. Do not try to conquer, but to connect. Sir, you mentioned about honesty, about feelings that arise within us. Being a Scots male, the first step is to... But actually connecting with these feelings, owning these feelings, especially the feeling of helplessness, is imperative if we are going to care for others. Because first, I must own my helplessness and hold it and own it before I can make a space for somebody else's helplessness. Next one, please. Just met Doreen, who I haven't seen for, 20 years, Doreen? Doreen was a charge nurse or a sister in intensive care in the southern, neurosurgical intensive care. I used to be, I started off life as a doctor. And as I was trained as a doctor, I was trained to do things, to perform things, to measure things. And when I became a chaplain, and when I walked into neurosurgical intensive care, my tummy would churn, my palms were sweaty. I hated it. First 6 months, I hated it, Doreen. And it was only with supervision that I began to explore that my role wasn't to do, my role wasn't to measure or stick anything in anybody. My role was just to be. And it was only with supervision that I began to explore that, because I felt helpless and I felt de-skilled. But then what I began to realize was that everybody else in that place, whether they be staff or relatives, at times also felt helpless. Because basically what we were all doing there was waiting. and caring for people who had had a head injury or a bleed or a tumour, waiting to see whether their pressure in their head would go up and that they may die, or it would go down and they could be operated on, or move on to another ward. And I discovered that that was the touching place. That was the empathetic bridge. Next slide, please. Powerlessness, can't control, can't fix, anxiety, fear, the touching place. You know John Bell's hymn, the touching place. Because if I could begin to own my helplessness and to hold it, then I had some insight of what it might mean for others. Not the same, not in any way the same, but that was the human bridge, the empathetic bridge of helplessness. So it became something that I could recognize and make a connection with others. Next one, please. But do you know what? I don't know about you, that often it's in the most, and I use the word advisedly, hellish of times in accompanying people and feeling helpless and hopeless and feeling no use, that paradoxically, these have been the times of transcendence, if I can stay with it. That those are the moments of grace and love where I really have with other people glimpsed something of the grace of God. Moments in Ward 61 and other places. And those are the bits that have certainly kept me going. Does that make sense? It's a weird thing, but there is something about that touching place that transcends the awfulness and points to something more. Next, please. I'm aware I'm talking a lot. We're coming to another activity in a minute. At the edge, at the end, the peering over, there is danger. But there's also energy. There's also often energy. Next slide, please. And often people do want to tell their stories, whether they're a relative or the person themselves. Life, scattered and gathered fragments, broken, ragged and jagged pieces, not rounded, whole or complete. Stories. Beauty and meaning are there. People trying to make sense of their lives, leaving, what legacy have they left? People trying to explore who this person is and always will be for them. Next slide, please. And enabling that storytelling may well enable ritual action. Now, by ritual, what I mean is an act that is invested with meaning. So it's got meaning. So an example of that might be the hundreds and thousands of times I've changed a nappy. That's routine. But for a parent whose baby is stillborn, the one time that they wash their baby and dress them and put a nappy on, that's a ritual. Because it's invested with meaning. So that Tom Gordon, who's speaking, talks about helping people clear their attic out, get rid of unfinished business. So telling story is also a ritual because it's just so heavily invested with meaning. Writing wills, planning funerals, developing memory boxes, just the kind of actions that people might do. Next one, please. And this, for me, is the wonderful learnings that I've had on some of these journeys. At the cliff edge of life, that's the edge you go to. Put yourself in conversation with that edge. Boy, it puts a perspective on life. Boy, it makes me think about the priorities in life. Actually going home every night and giving my boys a cuddle and telling them I love them, whether they want it or not. Teenage boys. Bleh. Carpe diem. I remember working in St. Columba's Hospice, living in Leith, overlooking the Forth. It was beautiful in the summer. In the winter, it was Baltic. I was saving up for double glazing. Nah. I went on 3 weeks in a gîte in south of France with my family and friends. Our lives are gifts, they're not a right. Seize the moment. As we live, we are dying. Death is part of life. Having a beginning and an ending, as the psalmist reminds us, gives meaning to life. What would it be like to live forever? Old Freddie's, they've got there's a film out, isn't there? Old Freddie sung about wanting to live forever. I'm not so sure about that one. Next slide. I think it's really important to remember the job of the Messiah has gone. That, we have to let go of people too, and not necessarily when they die, but actually when we leave, something greater fills the space. We don't have to constantly care. Next slide. R.S. Thomas again, I love this prayer, and I found it very helpful over the years, that actually there is another being who is always awake, whose prayers break over him or her, and not just for a few hours, but for days, for years, for eternity, that person is always held. Next slide, please. So, what I want to leave you with is practical theology. So instead of starting off with doctrine or beliefs, actually starting with lived experience. So starting off, what's it like to journey with somebody who's dying? And then to ask questions of, or engage with the Bible, engage with faith from that place. To live with the questions, the kind of questions that Calvin was asking. And that doubt and struggle is part of the journey of faith. And to allow people to doubt and struggle. And to acknowledge our own doubts and struggle. And the paradox of all of that it's messy. That life is messy. And I would argue that faith is messy too. The journey of faith is messy. As the Psalms describe. Next slide. So, going back to who can accompany you, but also to suggest that you might like to reflect on such things by doing some noticing and wondering on your experience, by writing it out, and then, based on the experience, what biblical themes, or what passages come to mind based on that story? What does it make you think of or curious about in relation to poems or paintings or prayers? And then discuss them with others or reflect on them. So that's doing theology. It's doing theology. Sounds very grand, but that's exactly what it is. And how much might that reflection or engaging with the Bible and with themes from the Bible then inform future practice? Next slide. So, for the last 5 minutes, well actually we've got 7 minutes. If you get back into your 2s and 3s, so your lived experience is looking at that. So what do you notice? What do you notice in terms of the pastoral care that's offered? What does it make you wonder about? And what biblical themes, what biblical stories come to mind? What psalms, what hymns, what stories? Have a wee chat with your neighbour. I'm putting you on the spot. But start off with what you notice about the situation and the care that's offered. Okay, folks. I know it's not ideal, but time's moving on. It's nearly lunchtime. But what do you notice, first of all? Just what do you notice? And what do you notice about the tiger? Oh, he didn't say a lot. What he said was right. Pardon? Presence, absolutely. The unanswered questions. He didn't try and answer the questions yet. Yep.
He's full of attention.
Pardon?
He's full of attention.
Yep. He's attentive. Yep. His facial expression. What about his facial expression? What does it tell you about him? He's listening. What else? Eye contact. Yep.
Empathy at the end.
Empathy at the end. Anything else? What's that? He looks a bit worried. Absolutely. He's feeling. You know, his wee mouth. I mean, he's just. His ear. They're frightened. Absolutely. They're both frightened. They're both frightened. Absolutely.
But they're together.
They're together, yes.
Each beside the tigers from the distance.
Yeah.
It's lovely that they're together.
Yes. In fact, you're right. They're closer, aren't they? In that last. Yeah. Absolutely. They're kind of curried in. Yeah, they found a safe place. Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a safe place. It's a safe place to ask the questions, to be angry. And I would go back. I notice he's feeling. I'm not quite sure what he's feeling, but he's feeling. And he's moved by that feeling.
The tiger asks his own questions, and I think that it's not just asking an answer. It's not asking an answer, it's us having to ask our own question of the person that needs it as well.
Right, so who he's asking a question?
Yeah, of Paul, he's asking a question of Calvin.
Okay, so he's asking a question of Calvin. Any response to that? Yep.
He seems to be the one who's been into, if you were doing a notice wonder realize, he's the one that he's the one who's from outside.
Yep.
And what struck me too is that he's the imagination that enables Calvin to hear Calvin's own voice.
He's the imagination that allows Calvin to find a voice. I wonder. You see, I wonder if it's more of a question about. It's a rhetorical question.
It's to keep the conversation going. It's an invitation to a conversation.
Sure, it's an invitation to a conversation. Sure. I also think it's an expression of just where he's at. There's something honest about it. But thank you. Sometimes I think it's a risk to say nothing, but when it feels appropriate, it's also a risk to say something. And that's where sometimes the fantasy is, am I going to get it right or wrong? But actually, if there's a feeling and there's an empathy around it, actually, it's not so much about what we say, it's about who we are and the way we say it. Theology is a very grand word, but what biblical themes or stories came to mind here? Jacob wrestling with God, good one, thank you. Gethsemane, absolutely. Psalm 23. Yeah, thank you. Jesus bids us shine. Footprints in the sand, yes. Nick, Jesus wept, thank you. Could we have the next slide, please? We're nearly finished. So basically, it makes me think about Job. And two things. First, his friends came and they were distressed. And secondly, they said nothing. But they stayed with him. They curried in. And then they opened their mouths and it all went wrong. 7 nights and 7 days. Don't know if I fancy that, but, next one, last one. Jesus wept. But it's not just about Jesus weeping. Jesus was moved. Jesus was distressed. Last slide. So the essence of this stuff for me is about being human and being real and being yourself. And in being yourself, you give permission. You create an atmosphere with the other person to be themselves too, that they're not judged. And actually, it's okay to feel the way they're feeling. And I think the courage to be who we are, for me, is very much dependent on our awareness of ourselves. Not having the answers and not being sorted, but actually aware the stories that we carry and where we are. Last slide. And just how important that is, whether you're into tattoos or not. Last slide. If you want to continue the conversation, I'd be delighted. Thank you very much, folks.